Hi there. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Telile 24/7. My name's Adam Cooke, and later on I'll be talking to Larry Evans. He's the chair of the board of directors for the Port Hawkesbury Food Bank, and he'll tell us how the food bank is reaching out to its clientele around Port Hawkesbury and the surrounding communities during these difficult COVID-19 times. I'll also be sitting down virtually, of course, with the CAO for the town of Mulgrave, who happens to hail from Richmond County. Her name is Darlene Berthier-Sampson, and she's going to tell us how Mulgrave officials are reaching out to the town's businesses, residents, and others to keep things moving along during this period of social distancing. And as well, I'll have an update from Port Hawkesbury Town Council for you. Town Council recently had a vacancy open up when one of its councillors moved just outside of the Port Hawkesbury town limits. How did the rest of Council deal with it? You'll find out very shortly. But first of all, we'll give you an update on COVID-19 statistics for Nova Scotia. As of noon on Wednesday, April the 15th, there were 549 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Nova Scotia. Sadly, these include 3 deaths, 2 of them in the eastern zone, which comprises Cape Breton Island and northeastern Nova Scotia. There is a positive note, though. There were 137 recoveries from COVID-19 in Nova Scotia, and to date there have been over 17,000 tests carried out, with more being carried out every day. We'll talk a little bit more about COVID-19 and its local impact in just a few minutes' time. But as promised, we're going to begin tonight in Port Hawkesbury, where Trevor Boudreau set off quite a series of events when the veteran Port Hawkesbury Council moved from outside of Port Hawkesbury into the adjacent community of Port Hastings. That set off a series of events that culminated in a special town council meeting earlier this week. What happened and what's going to happen in the last 6 months before this October's scheduled municipal elections? We'll tell you in a moment, but first, here's a little background. Trevor Boudreau was first elected to Port Hawkesbury Town Council in 2012. He was re-elected in 2016. Both times, Boudreau took the highest number of votes cast for any municipal council candidate in Port Hawkesbury. In March of 2019, Boudreau and his wife Sarah sold their house in Port Hawkesbury, but they continued to be town residents as they rented a home in Port Hawkesbury for 4 months. After that 4-month period expired, the Boudreaus moved into Trevor Boudreau's parents' home in Langley Court until March 24th of this year. At the same time, the Boudreaus moved into a home in nearby Port Hastings that they had purchased in February. Simultaneously, Boudreau filed a request with Port Hawkesbury Town Council to see if he could get an extension to his council term under the Municipal Government Act of Nova Scotia, even though he was no longer a resident of Port Hawkesbury. Port Hawkesbury's Deputy Mayor, Blaine Macquarie, attempted to deal with the situation at the regular monthly meeting of Town Council on Tuesday, April the 7th. At the time, Macquarie pointed out that a motion of Council last June would have permitted Boudreau to remain on Council for a 6-month period, even if he wound up spending most of last summer at his family cottage located outside of the town. With this in mind, Macquarie called for an amendment to the motion, which would allow Boudreau to be able to remain on Council for the final 6 months of his term, even though he was now living in Port Hastings. However, when the motion called for a seconder, Councillors Hughie McDougall and Mark McIver remained silent, and thus the motion died on the order paper and didn't go forward. Shortly thereafter, CAO Terry Doyle declared Boudreau's council seat vacant, but it was unclear as to what to do immediately after that. Less than 48 hours after Macquarie's motion failed to gain traction at the town council meeting, Port Hawkesbury Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton announced that a follow-up council session would take place on Tuesday, April the 14th. This council meeting, available to the public by teleconference, would include representation from 3 members of the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Mark Peck, Ross McDonald, and Nick Barr. As well, Municipal Solicitor Patrick Lamy gave an update on his assessment of the whole situation, including Council's leeway to be able to allow an extension of Boudreau's council term under Nova Scotia's Municipal Government Act.
The decision is for individual councillors to decide what are the factors in your mind that you feel is in the best interest of the town, regardless of the past, that are the reasons why you would or would not extend the term of a councillor who is no longer ordinarily resident.
However, the concept of simply amending the motion that allowed Boudreau to be able to stay part-time at his family cottage last summer didn't fly with Councillor Mark McIver. Speaking at the special council session on April 14th, McIver suggested that in his view, Boudreau had already used up most of the time that had been allotted to him by that motion, and as a result, he felt that there wasn't room to be able to amend the motion again to be able to allow for another leave.
Councillor Boudreau made the decision to purchase a home outside the municipality, and I guess for this term we've been told many times by staff that this is what the Municipal Act says, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. And now we're being told that we can just disregard it and do what's right for our municipality.
The second dissenting town councillor, Hughie McDougall, insisted that Boudreau was one of the finest people to ever serve with him at the town council table during McDougall's 19 years of public service. However, McDougall insisted that it would be a double standard to allow an extension to Boudreau when town council didn't grant any such extension to former town councillor Jeremy White, who was elected to his seat in 2016 but vacated it in 2018 just after he moved out of Port Hawkesbury.
If it was asked back then if he was leaving and not returning, the vote might have been different. The intent of that motion was made at the time, and I made the motion, that he was intending to come back. That was the difference between September 18th, 2018, or June 25th, 2019. The exact same two motions with two different outcomes.
As for the province's role in all of this, the representatives of municipal affairs that took part in the teleconference on April 14th pointed out that they would not interfere with Port Hawkesbury Council's decision on what to do with the vacancy. While they did point out that there would not be a need for a by-election if Council decided not to allow Boudreau back on Council, they insisted that they trusted the work of Solicitor Lamy and were not inclined to disagree with any work by a municipal solicitor. In the end, Municipal Affairs Representative Mark Peck pointed out that it was up to Council to determine what they were going to do with the advice they had received from their legal counsel and from the provincial government.
My main concern is that Council can continue to act in the best interest of the residents, which it's always done and will continue to do so, over the next number of months as we get through these unprecedented times. So I think the decision for Council this evening is fairly straightforward. Do you extend or not? And if the vote is yes, so be it. If the vote is no, so be it.
However, when Deputy Mayor Macquarie's proposed motion came to a vote among the 4 remaining elected Port Hawkesbury municipal officials, here's what happened.
All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we have 2 in favor and 2 opposed, so this motion cannot go forward and it is not approved.
And then, when Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton invited town councillors to find another way to address the seat vacancy, here's what happened next.
Is there any other business with regard to this item this evening?
Move for adjournment, Your Worship.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for adjournment?
Seconded, Your Worship.
Okay, it's been seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Speaking to reporters via teleconference following the special town council meeting of April 14th, Mayor Chisholm-Beaton said she was disappointed with the turn of events that night. The previous week, on her personal and professional Facebook pages, she had insisted that Trevor Boudreau be permitted to return to town council for the last 6 months of his term, even though he had relocated to Port Hastings. She was also critical of councillors McDougall and McIver for not responding to Deputy Mayor Macquarie's motion that would have allowed Boudreau to come back for 6 more months before the municipal elections in October. However, Mayor Chisholm-Beaton is optimistic that the town can push forward during this difficult time, and she pledged to work with the remaining elected councillors to try to serve the residents best during this time of COVID-19 social distancing protocols. In Port Hawkesbury for Telile 24/7, I'm Adam Cooke. Now let's leave Port Hawkesbury and head across the Canso Causeway to the town of Mulgrave. The Chief Administrative Officer for the town is a native of Richmond County, specifically Lordways, Darlene Berthier-Sampson. She's been in her post for over a year now. However, I don't think anybody in Mulgrave could have foreseen a year ago that right now the town would be caught up in the worldwide pandemic of COVID-19 and that strict social distancing protocols would keep the town from being able to operate as it normally does. So how is Mulgrave doing? We decided to check in with Darlene Berthier-Sampson a little earlier this week at her home in Point Michaud, and she's going to give us a little bit of an update on how Mulgrave is doing. Let's check in with Darlene now. So we're in a bit of a new world order here. Obviously, municipal governments are conducting themselves very differently from the way they were before. To begin, let's wind the clock back a little bit because it seems in a way that this all came together very, very quickly. Can you give us a sense of when you and town council started to get an idea that you might not be able to conduct your business the exact same way as you had been? Can you just trace that in terms of the difficult decisions you folks have had to make over the last few weeks?
Yeah, so Adam, I guess that starts back in January. I was starting to hear this personally on the news, international news about this pandemic. And I didn't dismiss it. As the news continued late into, and then I took a trip myself in February, a personal trip. And when I came back from that trip, that was around February 18th to the 20th. And I came back with a different view because the screening that we went through during that trip, it was aboarding a cruise ship down in Miami, and the screening was very robust, and the cleaning practices on board. So when I came back from that trip, the gravity of the pandemic was very heightened for me as opposed to when I left. And we were a bit ahead of the curve because at that time we were already meeting with our EMO office and our team with regard to the ongoing rail strikes. So we had opened up dialogue weeks before that, and we're working on procuring 6 months of chemicals for our water treatment plant and propane for our public works garage, some extra PPE because we were worried about our supply chain. So from that perspective, we were, I think, like some of the municipalities were, probably that planning event put us in good stead for dealing with the pandemic. But in terms of your question around hard dates, we had our last council meeting was held on March 16th, I believe it was. And I believe that was a couple of days before the Nova Scotia announced its emergency measures. I'm not sure of the exact date, but at that meeting, we closed that meeting to the public because of concerns, and we live streamed it through Facebook. There was concern that there wasn't enough discussion at the meeting with regard to the pandemic. I brought it up as this on my agenda, but I didn't feel that at the time I hadn't inherited a pandemic plan. We did not have one, and I did not feel council was prepared to be put on the spot to speak to it. So in my head, I knew that we had an EMO scheduled meeting the next morning at, I think it was 10 a.m. So I felt that, this is going to be deferred to that meeting anyway. So that, in fact, was my strategy. So at that EMO meeting was where on March 17th was where things really turned for us in terms of beefing up our team of who the members were, ensuring that the members on that team had their training, their EMO training certification, and to prioritize that. To bring in our rec coordinator, Heather Brennan, who has a very close, robust relationship with our seniors and our youth, to be part of that committee. Later that day, on the 17th, we had a large staff meeting, very spread out in our cafeteria, our huge cafeteria, where we went through the Occupational Health and Safety Act and made sure that staff were aware of their right to participate, right to know, and ultimately right to refuse. Because, it was clear that employees had different situations at home, different health situations. And so out of that fell one employee opted to work from home that could. Two chose to stay at work but keep their distance. And so it became about those, looking at our essential services and then modifying our practices. So at that time, March 17th, we closed our office and kept it closed until April 30th. And since that time, it's been pretty much daily pivoting and updating our website, our Facebook, and so on and so forth as events arise.
Is town council now teleconferencing? Have you folks been able to work out a strategy where you're able to get together via the various apps and various telecommunications tools that are available right now? How's that been working out for you?
Yeah, well, we haven't gone there yet. So I have just procured Zoom, and we did we have our first virtual council meeting scheduled for this upcoming Thursday at 6:30. I did some test calls yesterday with 3 of the 5 councillors. All went beautifully. And that app has the ability to record the meeting. So it's actually going to save me some work because I don't have to be busy taking minutes while the meetings, and I can have that archived. So there's a lot of good that's coming from this. That is one of them, in terms of modifying some of our practices that were due for an update anyway. So that I can see being a tool that we retain and, really expand its use. And of course, I'm right now involved, Adam, as well. Our water and waste is part of what's called shared service agreement, because that particularly has high risk, and we can talk about that. But we have an agreement with, we had an agreement with Antigonish, St. Mary's, District of St. Mary's, Guysborough County, and Mulgrave for what's called our operator direct responsible charge. So there's regulations that have to be met. And now, as a result of this pandemic, that shared service agreement is being expanded to Port Hawkesbury, Inverness, Victoria, Bedeque. So the more robust that is, the better position we are all in. So I'm actually one of the 5 committee members that are working on increasing that shared service agreement and ensuring that as a regional group, our risks are reduced. So we've been using, Keith McDonald out of Inverness has been using teleconference, and I think they're WebEx, but so we've been tapping into that.
Okay, good to hear. And of course, this is going to be a critical time for council being able to communicate not just with other municipalities, but with each other, given that the budget talks for the upcoming fiscal year would be taking place right about now. So you folks getting ready for that as well, using these new tools of communication?
We are. And so, the tool we have procured, after testing a number of them, I picked the one I picked because it allowed me to record meetings. It allowed me to put people in waiting rooms and have an in-camera session and bring those people back into meetings. So it gives the administrator some control. So there's going to be a test trial. I don't expect it to work perfect, but we'll work out the kinks as we go, as we've been doing with other practices. And we'll get through it.
Now, how will this impact individual residents of Mulgrave in terms of the services they receive from the town, but also in terms of being able to pay their water and sewer and pay their taxes and such? How will that change as a result of what we're going through with the COVID-19 protocols?
Oh, that's a good question, Adam. And that's got, tentacles that reach out because I guess I'd start with our recreation department. And some people might think a soft department, it's not a critical service. That has been greatly impacted and felt by our residents. So our recreation coordinator, Heather Brennan, is a veteran with our town and fantastic with our seniors. And all her programs, so she would have had a soccer program that was ready to begin that would have been canceled, after school programs that would have been canceled. She had, meet and greets and multiple activities with her seniors on a weekly basis. They've been all canceled. But Heather, like the rest of us, has done a fantastic job of pivoting. So she has reached out through calls, comfort calls. And she's also been very collaborative with the Mulgrave Medical Center. We have a safety officer, and that safety officer has been working on a grant for a senior safety program, and that safety officer has been making comfort calls as well. So there's a lot of collaboration right now between the medical clinic and the director. In fact, for Easter, she would have normally held an event, and because she couldn't, She took the time to go and get the full entourage, Easter bunny suit, and the volunteer fire department took her around town. So she made some people's otherwise, depressing days of not having that Easter very bright. So that is, something that's definitely being impacted, but we're trying to pivot and deal with that. From a water and waste perspective, they are our critical services. That is where our attention is very focused. Because you can imagine if we had a bad storm right now and our services were knocked out, and you had, it just aggravates. There's so many regulations around this. So as I indicated earlier, we have a shared service agreement. So if we have our new public works supervisor, Chesley Carr, is also our operator direct responsible charge, but we have no other licensed operators that could fulfill that position. So if he was to fall ill with the pandemic, we would find ourselves in a situation. However, that shared service agreement allows us to pull operators from other members in this agreement that have, pull inventory, pull critical parts, pull services. So that reduces that risk. So as I said, we've been beefing up that agreement, and really we were already part of the agreement. So we've been assisting the region, and it helps them, but it helps us as well. And the good thing that hopefully will come from this, Adam, is that when this dies down a bit, we'll look to take that shared service agreement and extrapolate it to our public works department. So we would reduce risk there. Meter connections continue. Meter disconnections continue. Usually our staff do not have to go in their homes. Patching on the roads has continued. Our staff can work with a 6-foot distance. They've been given extra PPE, so gloves, mask, hand sanitizer. We have one worker that's a utility worker that waters boats. We've been cognizant that because he's outside, some of the cleaning hand sanitizer we procured from the distillery in Antigonish can gel up in the cold. So we've made sure the hand sanitizer we've given him doesn't gel up in the cold. That utility worker used to go on the boats when they arrived to give them their meter readings. That does not happen anymore. Those meter readings come back to our office. We would take a screenshot of that, email that to the vessel, and have them communicate with us through that. Greatly impacted has been our administration processes from the perspective of dealing with the public service. So we're still trying to provide the best customer service we can via emails and phone calls. However, one-on-one has been terminated. So we are not taking any payments at the office. We have been advocating online payments. At the onset of this, we were set up to handle payments from the credit union and Scotiabank. So we quickly pivoted and tried to bring online the Royal Bank and BMO. So all the papers are signed, but because their processes have slowed down, it's taking a little bit longer. One of the roles that we recently took a hard look at through our EMO meeting was mine, because as you're probably aware, Adam, I do both the CAO and the CFO role.
Yes.
And yes. I don't have a backup. So what we did with mine was we chunked up my roles, and where my, certain sections of my finance roles could go to, past CAOs of the town that we would contract out to, other people that have consulted with the town, or outright contracted out to a CPA firm, excuse me. So, and then, some of my other CAO duties that maybe my involvement, like we're still moving forward with our new wastewater treatment plant, that $7 million project. Well, I'm on that capital committee, but my public works manager could take over my role if he had to in that situation, So it was a matter of saying, okay, the rep coordinator, Heather Brennan, like I update all the website for all our communication updates. Well, she could, that would be delegated to her in my absence as well. So we've been really trying to cover things off, extrapolate agreements. One of the things we are that's a little bit eminent for us to deal with, and will be dealt with on Thursday night, is our garbage, or our waste collection, our solid waste. Yeah. So because of right now there's a landfill variance, and our landfill operator in Guysborough is operating on half staff, where they have teams. That's their model that they're following. So because of that, they've asked us if we could participate, because we contract out all our waste collection. So last week was our first week on collecting the recyclables. Guysborough continued to handle the garbage and the compost, and we did the recyclables. So now we're being told that the variance is growing and that they maybe could take less. So we are going to have to come up with, actually, in fact, today I will be reaching out to the CAO of Guysborough, Barry Carroll, to find out what we can do as a municipality to assist them. So that may mean asking our residents to, wash out the recyclables very, very well so that we can maybe find a place to store them. But with that comes other management issues if you don't want rodents. So where would we put those, Our salt dome may be the only building that would be appropriate to store something like that we could manage that. So it's impacted just about everything we do, but we continue to find modifications and ways around it. And so far, I think we're in pretty good shape, Adam.
Well, it does seem like the town is remaining active and dealing with the issues that would have come up whether or not a pandemic had swept through, and it's good to be able to see that. And I just wonder, as we're heading into the home stretch of this interview, Darlene, what do you get the sense that the town itself, but that you personally as well and town council will take away from all this? You're having to find a very different way to do your management style, both individually and collectively. What do you feel that you're going to take away from all this, however long it lasts?
I think it's just confirming for me what I knew. I knew that I had a team that would choke up when I needed them to. I knew I had a team that was creative and could pivot when they needed to. I knew that people could quickly learn new procedures and for me, it's been good because it's really promoted the succession planning that I've been speaking to. That was a risk, and I think we'll take away that some of this pivoting and adapting and really reaching and working with less and being resourceful has always been done in Mulgrave, and that it's confirmed for me that we can continue as a solid team. So, and it's pushed the electronic side. So yeah, I think it's just confirming us what we knew the town was made of in the first place. So I'm really happy to be part of it.
We've covered a lot of ground in just a short time. Darlene, did you want to add anything else concerning all of this just before we wrap up here?
No, I guess the thing that I didn't mention, probably, Adam, for the benefit of the residents of Mulgrave, sure, is that's Zoom call on Thursday at 6:30. If you go onto the town's website under town notices, the agenda is there, and usually it's a one-page agenda. Now it's two because we have all the information on the virtual link. So the link is there, how people can tap into the meeting, or if they don't have the ability to use electronic means of a laptop or a phone, they can also teleconference into the meeting. So hopefully it works well, and we'll be taking feedback after the meeting to learn how we can improve if it doesn't go well. So that's it.
All right. Well, that's great. Good to see a participatory angle to that as well, Darlene. And we want to thank you for giving us a couple of minutes here today to help explain just how this has all affected Mulgrave and how Mulgrave is continuing its operations. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure, Adam.
All right. Darlene Berthier-Sampson is the Chief Administrative Officer for the town of Mulgrave. We've reached her at her home in Point Michaud, Richmond County. Stay tuned for more Telile 24/7 coming up soon. The Port Hawkesbury Food Bank serves the town of Mulgrave and the town of Port Hawkesbury, as well as several communities in western Richmond County, such as Evanston. We spoke earlier this week to Larry Evans. He's the chair of the board of directors for the Port Hawkesbury Food Bank, and we asked him about how the food bank is dealing with the current COVID-19 social distancing protocols and, of course, the need to get fresh, clean, healthy food out to those that need it the most. Here's that conversation now. Joining us on Telile 24/7 is the chair of the board of directors for the Port Hawkesbury Food Bank, Larry Evans. Larry, thank you for joining me today, and I wanted to ask you right off the bat, have you seen any changes, you and your colleagues at the Port Hawkesbury Food Bank on Granville Street, since the social distancing protocols really kicked in and we started seeing businesses shutting down around here, people being laid off? Basically, what is it like at the Port Hawkesbury Food Bank now compared to what we might have seen earlier in the winter?
Well, I suppose maybe back about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had some really high numbers, but in the last couple of weeks, the numbers have been pretty normal. An average week at the food bank is roughly between 30 and 40 families being served each week. 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, and during that time, the one big change we've had, and it may impact on how many people have been prepared to show up on Tuesdays, is that we've had to restrict the access to the food bank to only one client at a time, where before maybe 12 clients would be in the waiting room and one would be in the office getting registered and getting his or her groceries and then leaving, and then it was the next person's turn. But I want to assure people that if they have a need, we can meet it. We really feel that we're doing well from a food supply point of view, and we don't want people to feel like, oh, well, there's probably not much there anyway. There is. We have good supply.
And I know part of the reason that you folks are doing well with your supplies at this point is because of the work being done by Feed Nova Scotia, which tends to food banks across the province. Can you speak a little bit to what they have been doing at the provincial level to make sure that the individual food banks around Nova Scotia are going to be all right in this time?
Well, because we're a member agency of Feed Nova Scotia, we do get a weekly delivery on the food truck. Our food truck services Antigonish, Guysborough, Port Hawkesbury, and once a month Port Hood. And the truck comes every Thursday, and we're certainly finding the last few weeks that the loads on the food truck have been perhaps a little bit bigger than they used to be, because Feed Nova Scotia is maybe two things. The province kicked about $1 million into Feed Nova Scotia, of which about half of it has been used by Feed Nova Scotia to purchase additional food, and the other part of some of the money has been sent out to food banks as checks to the food banks so that we can buy more food. And Feed Nova Scotia is also finding, I think, that some of the major grocery wholesalers have been particularly generous in the last number of weeks. We're noticing we're getting a lot of fish products. We're getting more milk and bread products from Feed Nova Scotia. Those are things that we generally buy ourselves on a weekly basis. That is milk and bread. And last week I know we got 2 cases of eggs.
Now, I'm just wondering, Larry, you've talked about some of the foods that you folks have been getting, and I'm glad to see that that's been the case. Is there anything that you folks would really like to see just a little bit more of at the Port Hawkesbury Food Bank? I mean, there's always a call out for some specific goods, including especially the perishable items and produce. It's always difficult to keep those in stock, but what do you see as being items that you folks could really use at this particular time if anybody wanted to make a donation?
Well, we do have a need for some root vegetables like carrots and turnips. Those would be certainly appreciated. They last fairly well at the food bank. We got a big supply of potatoes over the last few weeks, because a couple of the restaurants in Port Hawkesbury that had closed down brought us all of their stock of potatoes, and that really helped us out a lot. We got a few 100 pounds of potatoes. We could use, from the produce point of view, we could use a few carrots and turnips. Those would be things that would last well at the food bank, and we could give them out over a few weeks. It's not something that goes bad in the first few days we get it. So that's one type of product we could use.
Larry, I want to ask you as well. I mean, here we are talking about what could the food bank use, but in this time of social distancing, but also making sure that food is properly delivered to individual places, not just food banks, does that change the way that you folks accept food donations at the Port Hawkesbury Food Bank? Has that changed at all?
Well, we're doing as well as we can in the limited space we've got to accommodate that. We have a side door access where people can that are delivering to the food bank can back their vehicles up to that door and can drop the food at the door, and we can take it from there. And so if we're there, we don't want them dropping it there when there's nobody around. But when one or more of us are there, it's not hard to accommodate the social distancing.
Now, I am curious, just in terms of donations, Larry, can you give us a sense, because the food bank serves Port Hawkesbury, but also communities like Mulgrave, communities in Western Richmond County like Evanston. Can you give us a sense of when people could come in to bring donations in? When are you folks there taking food in? And what are the food bank hours, just in case there are folks that do want to come in to use the food bank that might be watching this interview?
From the point of view of food donations, the best times would be Thursday morning when the food truck is there. There's a few of us there helping out anytime from about 11 o'clock till 12 or 12:30, and then on Monday mornings from 8:30 till 10 or 10:30, there's a group of volunteers there who are putting together the boxes for Tuesday. And then on Tuesdays is the day we serve the clients.
All right. I wanted to ask you as well, Larry, if you could give me a sense of how things are looking for if the social distancing protocols are in place for quite a while. You'd mentioned that in terms of bringing supplies in and being able to serve the clientele for the food bank, that you folks seem to be doing pretty well. And you mentioned, of course, the donation from the provincial government to Feed Nova Scotia. That's helping things too. Do you folks have the sense that if this goes on, we'll just throw it to late June into July, that you folks would be in good shape in terms of what you're able to supply to the people that are coming into the food bank right now?
Yeah, I think we've been very fortunate, Adam, that the community has really stepped up, and we've had some really significant financial donations to the food bank since this all started. We're in a normal year, we'd probably get about 75% of our financial donations between Thanksgiving and Christmas. This year, we're seeing a real good amount of generosity from our catchment area, in people recognizing that there are things that we could certainly use the funds to purchase, because maybe they're not the kinds of things that we would get donated very often. And so we're getting good financial donations, and that's going to go a long way to enabling us.
All right, that's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that, Larry. Last question to you, just before we wrap things up here. The Port Hawkesbury Food Bank has been operating for nearly 3 decades. You've been involved almost since the very beginning. And I remember talking to one of the folks that works with you, Mary Johnston, about when they expected the food bank would be considered a success. And she, of course, said, when we can finally close, because there isn't a need for a food bank. But that being said, nobody could ever see something like this coming in the early 90s when the food bank is set up. Do you get the sense that what you folks have learned from over the years has prepared you for an emergency situation like this, and that just basically the experiences that you've had keeping this food bank running are helping you at this particular time?
Oh, for sure. And, the fact that people like Mary Johnson, who's been around since the beginning, are still with us, has certainly helped, and we've got a pretty experienced crew of volunteers, and I think they've got a sense of what the community needs, and what the demand is likely to be. We may have to be a bit imaginative if this goes on too long with how we deliver the service, but I think we're prepared to do that, and I think. From my point of view as chair of the board, I certainly think that we're providing a service to the community that's definitely needed now. Whether it will continue to be needed in the future remains to be seen. But I'm glad that we have a food bank in Port Hawkesbury during times like this, because it would be probably a very hard thing to get up and running in a hurry.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in just a short time, Larry. I appreciate you giving me some time here. Did you want to add anything about all this before we wrap things up?
No, I just want to say how grateful we are to the community for all their support, and how grateful I am to see the level of support from our volunteers continuing through all this, because it's not easy to be there week in and week out doing the work that has to be done, and we've got some really dedicated people. And I know from what I'm hearing from people in the community that if we run short of volunteers, it sounds like there are others waiting in the wings that would love to help out if we needed them.
And just for our viewers that might be making a consideration as to whether to come to the food bank for the first time, Larry, can you give the exact street address? It is right next door to Shindig's Pub, but what are we looking for in terms of the street address for the food bank?
It's 504 Granville Street.
All right, well, we'll leave it at that. Larry, thank you so much for giving me a couple of minutes here on Telile 24/7. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that wraps up another edition of Telile 24/7. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'd like to thank our interview guests this week, Larry Evans and Darlene Berthier-Sampson. And a special thanks to everybody else that contributed to the show in any way this week. If you have any ideas for potential interviews or stories, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me directly by phone. That number is area code 902-625-8863. You can also reach me by email. My address is adamjrcooke, Cook with an E, at yahoo.ca. And you can follow Telile Community Television on various social media feeds. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you can see all kinds of content, including every single episode of Telile 24/7, on our Telile Community Television YouTube channel. Be sure to check that out. As always, we want to let you know of some very important places you can get information on COVID-19. Please feel free to check out the World Health Organization's website. That is who.int. Once again, who.int. You can also get a Canadian perspective by visiting canada.ca/coronavirus. And as well, here in Nova Scotia, you can check out the 811 website as well. And please call 811 if you feel that you or anybody in your family has COVID-19 symptoms as well. Thank you very much once again for joining us. My name's Adam Cooke, and I hope we'll see you again next time on Telile 24/7. Take care, stay safe, wash your hands, and goodbye for now.